A Giants podcast for Giants fans
by Giants fans.
It's Shaun Morash and Paul Dottino.
Down the sideline, into the end zone. Touchdown, Giants!
From the offseason through the wins and the losses, it's time to take one Giant step.
Guy we haven't heard from in quite a few weeks, but what better time than now that the dust has settled from the draft? He's a frightening face to look at, but a beautiful voice to listen to. His name is Paul Dottino. Paul, welcome back for this episode, pal. How are you?
Hey, great to rejoin you, Shaun. I think the terminology is a face made for radio, right?
Well, and listen, I've been told I have it plenty, so I totally understand. Paul, let's get right to it. You had my juices flowing pre-draft, texting me a little bit, especially after night one of the draft and what they had done, and looking ahead to night two. Shockingly, you and I were kind of in lockstep on, wide receiver, center, the whole thing. Oh, by the way, the Giants ended up being on lockstep too, as far as a lot of that went in. We're going to, throughout this episode, get into your thoughts, Paul, on everything they did with the draft and, what you liked, what they didn't like. But I do want to start this episode with just the philosophy in this draft. Right off the bat, two of the first three picks, the Giants are in trade-up situations. And when looking back at the old regime of Dave Gettleman and the jokes used to be made about, not trading back, whether trading up, Joe Schoen was so fluid in this draft, including involving Brian Dable, which I'm sure you'll get to in a little bit here, and placing the call of the text to Sean McVay on day 3. But even day 1, the one thing that Giant fans have walked away from this draft skeptical on is just moving up one spot and using a couple back-end picks to do so. Paul, give us some insight, man. What did you think of the way that Schoen handled specifically rounds 1 and 3 with the trade-ups? And number 2, why would the Giants trade 2 third-round picks to move up just one spot and land Deontay Banks?
Well, first off, I think it's important to understand that Joe Schoen actually showed 2 very important characteristics during the first 3 rounds. He showed the ability to be aggressive and to get what he wanted in 1 and 3 by trading up. But in round 2, he showed incredible patience by waiting for John Michael Schmitz, the center out of Minnesota, to drop to 57. I mean, here was the thing. If you looked at the Giants draft collateral, okay, they went in with 11 draft picks, then traded the 3rd rounder a month ago for Darren Waller. So that brought them down to 10. I was under the understanding that the Giants did not want to go into this draft drafting more than 8 players. Okay? Yeah. They know that they've got a better team. There's no reason to draft 11 players or 10 players.
Especially when you consider undrafted free agents that might have a chance to crack the roster as well.
So 8 was the max. So they were going to make trades. In fact, it was likely they were going to make 3-for-1 draft pick trades. But here was the trick. Dable did not want to tap into the first 3 rounds of the draft in a trade, nor did he necessarily want to tap into the first 3 rounds of next year's draft. So he was going to have to try to figure out moving up in the draft and finding value by dealing his 4th and 5th round picks. That was going to be the trick, because he had already traded the 3rd for Waller earlier, so he was not going to trade the only 3rd that he had left on draft weekend. You following me so far?
Yeah. The only thing I'll say is, real quickly, you just said Dable didn't want to. Did you mean Schoen?
Schoen.
Okay.
Schoen. I meant Schoen.
Right.
But they're in lockstep anyway.
Of course. That's why I just wanted to see, though, if that was more, Dable was pressing him on that.
Yeah, I misspoke. It was definitely Schoen. Okay. So understanding that the 4th and 5th rounders were going to have to be the keynote dealings in a draft, that's what he wound up doing. All right, so let's make that clear in terms of the overall general philosophy. Now, in the first round, the Giants knew there were at least 2 teams behind them who wanted to trade up to get Banks. Okay? One of those teams has already come out and revealed itself. That would be Brandon Beane with the Buffalo Bills. Now, he wasn't going up to get Banks. He wanted to go up to get Dalton Kincaid because he was afraid the Cowboys were going to get him. Right. Now, I've already tweeted this out because he gave that to the Buffalo Bills media. Yeah. He had a deal already in line with Schoen. All right.
And that would have slid the Giants back another 4 or 5 spots. I forget what that ended up being. Maybe
to 27 it would have been.
27, okay.
All right. They were at 25, okay? It would have slid them back just a couple of spots, okay? But the problem was the Giants had a cluster of players, all right? In fact, it's pretty amazing. They had guys at all different positions in the cluster. And I'm not at liberty to tell you which positions, but I know who the guys were. And they were coming off the board rapidly as they were getting close to their picks.
A couple of the receivers, including Zay Flowers, were rumored there, Paul. You're not going to have you confirm that. But that was...
I don't mind telling you those guys were certainly hot names.
Right.
Okay.
Sure.
Now, as the receiver run occurred right before the Giants picks, and let me tell you something. There was not Buffalo. There was Baltimore, and there was Minnesota, and there was Pittsburgh. All three of those teams could have been potentials for Deontay Banks. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
The Giants got lucky that there was a run on receivers right before they drafted. And they also knew that as those receivers came off the board and Banks was going to be their primary target, they knew that there were two teams behind them that were trying to trade up. Okay? Knowing that, that's why they contacted Jacksonville and said, can we move up one spot? Because we're afraid someone's going to try to trade up with you. Jacksonville was perfectly agreeable to trade down. They were not looking for a receiver or a cornerback.
Right.
So they would move down.
Right.
So they were willing to deal out. They were taking phone calls. So if Shane doesn't make that deal, there were at least two teams that wanted Deontay Banks that were going to talk to the Jaguars. But the Giants were able to make that preventative strike, move up to one spot. They locked them in. They got Banks, which is the guy that they wanted. And then Jacksonville, moving a spot down, then got the call from the Bills, who wanted to then get up there so that they could swipe him away from Dallas Cowboys. Kincaid. I mentioned it before. So that's how the first round went down. Now, here's why this was so critical.
Yeah.
And why it was so important that he did what he did, Shane. By trading the fifth rounder and a seventh, he was able to hold on to his 4, which then meant either in the second or third round, the Giants knew in one of those 2 rounds they were going to have to move up to get one of their guys, whether it be the center or one of the wide receivers. They knew they were going to need that 4th round pick to move up in one of those rounds. Shane held his water when Tippmann went to the Jets. Shane looked at the rest of the board and didn't think there was another team that was going to take a center. So he gambled and sat pat to grab John Michael Schmitz, and then immediately said, okay, now we can use that 4th round collateral to move up in the 3rd round to get our wide receiver. So that's how the machinations worked on draft night.
That's a masterclass. And I just want to say, Paul, and I'm sure you'll agree, for anybody listening to this that doesn't like the idea of trading up one spot. Now, and I'm going to bring up the other name and the reason people don't like that in a second. Just remember, it was not that long ago at the end of Jerry Reese's reign where the team sat back on that night where Laramie Tunsil had the bong video going nuts, and the Giants had a couple players, including Leonard Floyd, that they had graded highly, go off the board ahead of them, where suddenly they were sitting there caught and scrambled and took Eli Apple, and it was part of what set this franchise back. If you like a guy, you've targeted a guy, you've scouted your guy, go make sure you get that guy, and don't worry about the 5th or 6th round lottery ticket in that spot. Now, Paul, the reason people will push back is in this spot, Joey Porter completely fell as a corner, where some people thought he could eventually go top 15, top 20. I after reading and seeing everything, I get it. Banks absolutely fits what they're looking for with Wink Martindale way more, and I love that they're involving him. But any thoughts there on the fact that Joey Porter fell back and the Giants didn't use the same philosophy they used a year ago with Ike Ekwonu and Evan Neal? Basically, will take whoever's left.
Let me put it to you this way. If Joey Porter was legitimately the better corner, the Pittsburgh Steelers would have taken him before the Giants had an opportunity to. But Pittsburgh did not take Joey Porter, did they? Until the beginning of the 2nd round.
Right.
If Porter was really, really graded higher than Banks, the Steelers would have taken him there. But they didn't. So that tells you all you need to know. Now, I will also add, I remember one very, very important time in Giants history, goes back to Ernie Accorsi, when he traded up to go get Jeremy Shockey. He was that sold and convinced on Shockey, and he only moved up a couple spots to go get him because he knew somebody else was going to go get him if he didn't. And that's what you do. When you
Yeah.
know there's a guy that you've got to get, he's one of those guys in your cluster that you have a heart set on, you got to go get him if you can. And again, Shane was not going to use all those picks anyway, Shaun. He wanted to use some picks as draft collateral.
Well, and again, Paul, the idea to come out of rounds 1, 2, and 3, when you really think about the NFL draft, obviously you want the first round guy to always be a guy that hits the second contract. You love all the picks to be that, and a cornerstone player for your team. But in the end, maybe kind of the lazy way of observing it is your first, second, and third round picks, generally speaking, you want them to be formidable starters on your team by year 2, by year 3. Certainly, at least for the third round, second round. The Giants have missed in so many years on these third round picks. So that's why I find round 3 with trading up for Jalen Hyatt to be really fascinating and dare I say it, awesome. Instead of sitting back and saying, okay, we'll take whoever when they fall to us here. They get aggressive. And, whether you believe in mock drafts or not, there were mock drafts that had Jalen Hyatt going to the Giants in the first round. He slides all the way down. There was questions about him running the route tree, whatever, fine. But to use a third round pick on him seems like extremely great value. And I don't know how you look at it. Oh, wow, they give up a fourth round pick. I mean, that is just exceptional working of the draft there. You're taking a guy that some thought had the skills to be a first-round pick in the third round, filling a speed need of a guy who could beat you over the top at wide receiver. And to me, I think that's why it's the most tantalizing selection because of what he brings to the table and the asset you had to give up.
The two knocks that you would put on Hyatt as to why he might drop. Number one, a limited route tree in Tennessee's offense. It's not because he can't run those other routes. It's simply put that he didn't exhibit it on tape because he only ran a limited tree. So he's going to have to get coached up. And I think we all know that wide receivers coach Mike Groh did a great job with the receivers the Giants had in the room last year. I don't think you have any doubt that he will be able to coach the best out of Hyatt and teach him the rest of the route tree. So that's not something that worried the Giants at all. The second part was Hyatt was a bit more like a pipe cleaner, a little wiry, didn't have enough meat on his bones. But here's the interesting part. From the time that he played in the mid-170s at Tennessee, he came into his pro day over 180 and it put on some muscle and is already putting on more muscle. And he told the Giants when they took him, he plans on coming in opening day at 190. All of a sudden, at 190 now, he's not a liability.
Yeah.
He's not a guy who at 190 is going to be easily beaten up in press coverage by a corner because now he's got a little bit of sturdiness to him. And so if he had played at 190 at Tennessee, I tell you, he's not going as low as he went. But there was some concerns about his ability to get off against strong corners at the release. He should not have that problem with the coaching and with the extra muscle he's put on.
And what I wanted to add to a draft strategy was, first of all, Joe Schoen and Brian Dable, as you hit on a little bit, working in unison. The report is out there that Brian Dable was the one that either placed the text or the call to Sean McVay about finalizing that spot to move up. So,
all right, let me clarify that for you, Shaun.
Okay.
The Giants, they knew that they were going to have to move up in the third round to get the receiver. So they had multiple people in the room starting to reach out because they knew the more calls they made to try to spread the net, if you will, it would give them the better chance of finding a taker who could move up. It just so happened that Dable's call was to the Rams.
Okay.
And that was the one that paid off. But Joe Schoen is not the only guy in that room who's sitting there making phone calls during the draft.
Which is great.
He's got other people in the room also making calls. It just so happened that Dable's call was the one that produced the fruit.
Now, Paul, I know you can't judge everything by a camera, but just looking at the way they were operating every time a pick came up, it just looked like a real war room for once with the Giants. You could just tell they exuded confidence. But the reason I bring up Dable doing that is clearly Brian Dable, an offensive-minded head coach. Mike Kafka was in that room as well. If he's all in on making those calls or whatever, that also gives me confidence that, Jalen Hyatt, the weight and all that, like Dable clearly sees a path for Jalen Hyatt to be a factor on this Giant offense, to be that all in on the pick. So that also excites me because, let's face it, and I don't know how many Giant fan listening can disagree with this, we trust this coaching staff. Like we saw last year, how many players did we see get better with good coaching? So Jalen Hyatt, for all his flaws, and I'm not saying that he can't become some kind of draft bust, I'm extremely confident that this coaching staff believes they can get the most out of him and use him the way he needs to be used in the NFL.
Well, that's the whole synergy between the GM, the personnel department, and your head coaching staff. You have to know not only what do they want, but what can they work with and what can they improve on. You have to know that. If you've got a coaching staff that can't necessarily transfer those college skills to the pro level, then what have you got? You're drafting strictly on projection that may never come. And that's why it's all part of the equation. It's one of the reasons why Kafka and Martindale coming back to the Giants this year was so incredibly important in the year 2 of the Dable regime. And I would add one other thing about this particular draft. If you think about it, and I know you want to get to the later guys later, but value truly met need in those first 3 picks.
Yeah.
They got appropriate or better value at all 3 positions that were necessary to improve this team.
Yeah, and that leads me right into what I was going to ask you next. Okay, you just touched on Hyatt, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I kind of want to talk about all 3 guys in terms of their use next year.
Right.
This wide receiver room suddenly seems a lot deeper. We'll see about the ceiling for Hyatt. We know Hodgins and Slayton will play a role. Who knows about Shepard? Let's see Wandell on the rehab. Of course, they had Paris Campbell, and we'll see about Jamison Crowder. So I'm just naming a couple of these names. I believe that the room will be very fluid. It'll be a true training camp battle for all. I think it's impossible to think who's going to have, the leading snap share of week 1 now. And that could be something that's easily different in October. And obviously injuries change that. But I think that's going to be fluid week to week. So my point is, Paul, I don't think anybody should panic if Jalen Hyatt isn't one of the starting 3 wide receivers on opening day, correct?
Correct. And I will tell you something else. It's more likely than not that Wan'Dale Robinson and Sterling Shepard start week 1 on PUP.
Okay. No, that's interesting. Even with the rehab, everybody's reported on Wandell or looked at, people are getting excited about his rehab. You think he begins on PUP?
Oh, they're both going very well, but neither one is going to start training camp on the active. I'm telling you that right now. They'll both start training camp on PUP, and it wouldn't shock me if they start week 1 on PUP. I mean, it's a little early yet to make a proclamation, but I'm just preparing you for the fact that may be the case. And that's not necessarily bad. No. Because if you look at the numbers in the Giants wide receiver room, maybe by the time those 2 guys are actually ready to get into a game, the wide receiver room will have sorted itself out a little bit.
Yeah, of course. And that makes the Jamison Crowder signing, obviously a little more important if those guys aren't ready to go out of the beginning of the year. So let's just go back to Deontay Banks for a second. I was really big on, I wanted a corner in round 1. I didn't love the 4 wide receivers, but clearly the Giants might have loved a couple of them. And I mean, Paul, how many times did we talk about this last year? The moment Torrey Jackson got hurt, how much things changed on that back end for the Giants last year. And it just, you don't know how much longer Torrey Jackson's even going to be here. And the pick of Deontay Banks isn't just about this year. So you go and you get a guy that fits Wink's system, an extreme freak athlete. But as we know, Paul, we've been burned as Giant fans with corners in the first round before, right? I mean, Eli Apple was atrocious. DeAndre Baker didn't work out, and so on and so forth. And that list is long. I mean, you got good value out of Aaron Ross as well, and Mukamura was okay. But what is the realistic expectation this year for Deontay Banks? Because they didn't bring back Fabian Moreau. We're going to see what they do, whether it's on the outside or in the slot with Flott, Aaron Robinson coming back. Is Deontay Banks, I mean, when you draft the guy 25th overall, you expect that guy probably to start right away for your team. But at the same time, last year you had Tariq Woolen with the Seahawks, Sauce Gardner with the Jets, both be awesome. Some of these other corners, they struggle early on. Is there an expectation that Deontay Banks is going to take a little while to get used to the NFL? Or do we think full systems go here? And it's going to be Sauce Gardner's a lot, but starting second corner next to Adoree Jackson, let's roll it out here.
There will be some rookie growing pains for Deontay Banks. And the number 1 growing pain you're going to have to tolerate, Shaun, whenever he gets into the lineup is his grabbiness. There are times that he gets too grabby. And in the National Football League, they're going to throw those penalty flags real quick.
Right.
And the last thing you want is for him to be guarding somebody downfield and he's step for step shadowing the guy, and then he draws a 35-yard pass interference. All right, that's going to make your hair crawl from the back of your neck.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. So he's going to have to clean that up. That's the biggest issue that I saw in the film of Deontay Banks, because he's got the length, he's got the toughness, he's got the physicality. He'll come up and support in the run. He certainly has the flat-out burner speed and the shadowing skills, and he's certainly not afraid of anybody. So it's the grabbiness that would be the most concerning for me right now. He's going to have to grow out of that. He's going to have to learn how they call it in the NFL, and he's going to have to deal with much bigger, stronger, faster wide receivers in the NFL. That's going to instinctively make him want to grab. He's going to have to fight that instinct. Now, how quickly does he get into the starting lineup? First of all, he's not a slot corner in any way. He's a boundary corner.
Totally
Let's
boundary.
make that clear.
Yep.
He's played a little slot in college, but I don't think they're going to want him here in the slot. So what he'll do is he'll compete during training camp against the rehabbing Aaron Robinson, against the Rodarius Williams, against everybody who's out there. And they're going to say, okay, compete. And if he deserves to start opening day, if he's that spectacular in August, maybe he will be the week 1 starter. But I'll be honest with you, it won't surprise me if he's not. I think Aaron Robinson's really, really good. To me, the value of Deontay Banks is not just what he does this year or when he gets into the lineup this year. It's the fact that if Adoree Jackson, who has a voidable year on his deal at the end of this season, is gone, you want Deontay Banks to be that number 1 corner in 2024.
Yeah, look, long term, it's only better for the Giants if we end 2023 and you say, wow, Aaron Robinson, Cordell Flott, and Deontay Banks are players, and then you feel really confident about the corner room going forward. And that's something everybody always has to remind themselves. It's always about going forward. It's not just this year. Real quickly, before we get to day 3, John Michael Schmitz, 2 drafted at center, 2nd round, a true anchor type player. They drafted Josh Rizzuto last year in the 3rd round at a guard, Evan Neal last year in the 1st round at a tackle. Obviously, they picked up Andrew Thomas's 5th-year option. How many years in a row where we begged for investment in the O-line? Joe Schoen now has used 3 borderline premium picks on starters on the offensive line. Paul, I got to think that they hope Rizzuto, Schmitz are 2 guys starting on that interior this year, right?
Yeah, I think Joshua Rizzuto, as we enter the spring, is the guy that they would like to win the starting left guard spot. Fortunately, you've already seen the pictures in the film, so I'm not giving anything away. He is over the neck and shoulder injury that plagued him the second half of his rookie season. And so he's doing the weights and everything he's supposed to do. He's cleared, he's rehabbed, and he's going to be ready to fight for that job. And I know the Giants think the world out of him. Again, a draft consultant told Rizzuto last year that if he stayed in school for another season and mastered one position, he would be a 2nd-round draft pick. The Giants got him when he came out a year early as a 3rd-round pick.
Yeah.
And the fact that he even played last year put him a year ahead of his career schedule. So this is a guy who I firmly believe is probably going to win the left guard spot. And I just think that you look at the youth and the pure talent on that offensive line, it's the best the Giants have had in a long time.
Yeah, and I think we hope that Schmidt solidifies it. He seems very pro-ready at the center position, but I'm certainly excited. And look, we know, Paul, the offense could go as the O-line goes. Oh, by the way, worth noting with Rizzuto, remember when he was in there last year, may have struggled in pass protection. He was a damn good run blocker for them.
Sensational run blocker. The pass blocking is always going to come second with a young offensive lineman. That's just the way it goes in this league. And I talked to Alex Boone, the veteran offensive lineman, was in the league for a decade.
Yeah.
He has an offensive line school in Minnesota. And I spoke with him yesterday. He is John Michael Schmitz's personal mentor and has been working with him for quite a long time. And in talking with Alex, he is blown away. He said Schmitz is a perfect fit for the Giants scheme. And specifically, he was very effusive in his praise about Michael Schmitz's capacity up here. Very, very smart player who is very, very good with the playbook and very good in recognition at the line of scrimmage. And that's going to be very critical as he acclimates himself to the NFL.
I love, and I also love the nugget that Schmitz was at the Giant-Viking playoff game as a fan. I found that very interesting now, where hopefully he's a part of the next Giant playoff game. All right, thanks for watching this video. If you've enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date on our latest updates. Links are all in the description. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. One giant step.